History is often written by the victors, but it is felt most sharply by the losing side. We are taught that June 6, 1944, was the beginning of the end. We see the Higgins boats, the GIs jumping into the surf, and the heroic climb up the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc. But for the men standing inside the concrete coffins of the Atlantic Wall, D-Day wasn't just a battle. It was a mathematical realization. It was the exact moment thousands of soldiers, men who had survived the frozen hell of the Russian front, looked out a narrow observation slit and realized that they weren't just fighting an army. They were fighting an industrial machine that had already decided their fate months before the first shot was even fired. By the end of this story, you'll understand why one German officer, after seeing the horizon for the first time that morning, didn't reach for his gun. He reached for his radio, and instead of calling for reinforcements, he asked a question that would haunt the German high command for the rest of the war. But to understand that question, we have to go back to the silence before the storm. After 8 a.m., Bunker 620 ceased to exist. A few hours ago, it was the quietest place on Earth. After 5 a.m., the morning of June 6th, another watch, another stretch of waiting for something that might never come for Oberleutnant Klaus Richter of the 352nd Artillery Regiment. It began the way so many others had on the Normandy coast. Cold, damp, quiet. A thin mist clung to the channel, dulling sound and shrinking the world to shades of gray. At first glance, the sea looked still. Richter couldn't notice any waves, no fluctuations in weather. Then he lifted his binoculars as dawn struggled against the horizon. A dark line appeared where the water met the sky. It grew wider, darker, sharper. Shapes emerged. Dozens, hundreds. His breath caught. It was a city, a floating metropolis of steel sliding out of the mist. It wasn't a fleet. Richter already understood that there is surely something terrifying. Before a single Allied soldier touched sand or anyone spoke the names of Utah or Omaha, the Reich was about to drown. To grasp the shock of that moment, you have to understand the mindset of Fortress Europe in the spring of 1944. From Norway to the Spanish border, the Germans had poured concrete and steel into what they believed was an iron horizon and an impenetrable barrier. The Atlantic Wall was sold to soldiers as proof that an invasion could be stopped cold at the shoreline. But Richter was not naive. In his 30s, he was a veteran of the Eastern Front. He had lived through propaganda and learned to distrust it. He commanded an artillery battery dug into concrete casemates inland from the beaches later called Omaha. From his observation bunker high on the bluffs, he saw more than maps and slogans. He saw gaps, incomplete bunkers, fields of fire that didn't quite overlap. Shortcuts farmers still used through minefields meant to be sealed tight. The talk was always about the invasion, the big one. The question was where. German intelligence was convinced it would come at Pas de Calais, the shortest crossing. That's where the 15th Army waited. Normandy, they believed, was a distraction. That belief was so deadly. Operation Fortitude, the Allied deception campaign, had worked perfectly. Normandy was thinly held. Richter's own division was a mix of hardened Eastern Front veterans and boys barely old enough to shave. Brave, yes, but stretched too far, guarding too much coastline with too little strength. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel knew the truth. If the Allies weren't stopped on the beaches on the first day, the war in the West was lost. Air power would crush any counterattack. Day one was everything. That's why Rommel pushed mines, obstacles, steel stakes. The men called them Rommel's asparagus. And then the weather changed. A storm swept the channel on June 5th. German forecasts said an invasion was impossible. Command relaxed. Senior officers left their posts. Even Rommel went home for his wife's birthday. So when Klaus Richter stood watch that morning, the mood was routine. The sea was rough. The sky was low. Nothing was supposed to happen. Then the mist began to lift, and the sea filled with ships. He was looking east when he saw it, just a flicker at first. Richter raised his Zeiss binoculars and focused. The slow, steady rhythm of a night watch vanished as his heart began to pound. It was a ship, it wasn't a flicker. Not a patrol, not a raid. Hundreds of them, and behind those, more still. He swept the horizon left to right. Everywhere he looked, the same impossible sight. The sea was no longer gray water. It was solid. Dark shapes pressed together so tightly they erased the line between ocean and sky. A cold dread climbed his spine. It felt like staring at a math problem that had no solution. For a moment, Richter couldn't process it. The scale alone defied logic. German intelligence believed the Allies might assemble 3,200 ships, an effort so massive it bordered on fantasy. What he was seeing was something else entirely. He tried to count. I gave up. His mind shifted into instinct. Battleships and cruisers first, huge silhouettes cutting through the water, destroyers darting around them like wolves. And then the rest. Landing craft by the thousands, packed so densely they looked welded together, as if the sea itself had turned to iron. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. I looked again. The image only sharpened as dawn crept upward. Later, historians would put a number on it. Nearly 8,000 vessels from almost 9 nations. The largest amphibious invasion force ever assembled. But to Richter, it wasn't a statistic. It was physical, heavy, a presence so overwhelming it seemed to bend the horizon. Germany had built a wall of concrete, and the Allies had responded with a bridge of steel. Richter's hand was slick with sweat as he grabbed the field telephone and reported from observation post 4 that he had visual contact with the channel and could see ships approaching. The response he received was tired and dismissive. He was told that higher command already had reports of a few vessels off the coast, possibly a raid, and that he was to stand by. Richter insisted that they did not understand. He reported that it was not a handful of ships, but thousands, that the sea was covered from horizon to horizon, and that what he was witnessing was the invasion. There was a pause on the line, filled with disbelief, and Richter sensed that the officer on the other end assumed he was a nervous junior, imagining shapes in the fog. The reply came back that the sea conditions made such a sight impossible and that his report was incorrect. Richter snapped back that he was looking at the scene with his own eyes and urged the officer to look at the sea themselves. He then slammed the phone down and tried another line, eventually reaching regimental headquarters. There he reported that the invasion fleet had arrived and claimed there were 10,000 ships. Even as he knew the number was an exaggeration, that still felt too small to capture what he was seeing. The major asked whether he was certain, beginning to reference the weather, but Richter cut him off. He stated that the weather was clear enough to see the end of the world and that it was sitting in the channel. He then formally requested permission to open fire. This time the urgency landed. The chain of command was frozen, trapped by its own assumptions. Reports of parachutists inland were stealing all the attention. No one was watching the sea. Richter didn't wait. He shouted orders. Men rushed to their positions, staring out in stunned silence. Awe and fear mixed on their faces. The drills were over. This was real. Heavy shells were hauled up. Rangefinders called out distances that sounded unreal. The long, silent gun barrels began to rise inch by inch toward the fleet. Through his binoculars, Richter saw landing craft starting to form up. He felt it then, a low vibration in the air, thousands of engines humming together. It sounded like something alive, like a superpower breathing. Just before 6, the order came. Engage at will. Relief cut through the fear. Action replaced disbelief. Fire! The ground shook as the first gun roared. Then another. Then another. Shells screamed out over the water. Richter tracked them, pride and dread colliding in his chest. Water plumes erupted among the ships. Misses. Adjustments. Then a hit. He saw the American destroyer, USS Corey, take the blow. Flash. Smoke. The ship listing, crippled. From Richter's position, his guns had drawn first blood. A cheer broke out among his men. For a few minutes, it felt like a fight, like their training mattered. Then the fleet kept coming. The gap closed. The lines didn't slow. Ships poured past, untouched, endless. Richter fired again and again, knowing it didn't matter. One ship harassed, 100 slipped through. The futility hit him all at once. He was trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. Then he saw the battleships turn. Giants like the USS Texas swinging their guns toward shore. Flashes lit the horizon, a silent lightning storm. Seconds later, the world around him began to tear itself apart. The earth buckled, fields erupted, Concrete shattered. The Atlantic Wall was no longer being tested. It was being dismantled. Empty sky. Where were the Panzers? Where was the Luftwaffe? Richter searched the sky, almost desperately, for something familiar. German fighters, a counterattack, anything. There was nothing. The air above Normandy belonged entirely to the Allies. Fighters, bombers, transports. They filled the sky in every direction, layer upon layer, moving with calm precision. The Luftwaffe was supposed to contest the landing, to disrupt it, to buy time. Instead, on this decisive morning, it was almost absent. Later, the numbers would tell the story. On D-Day, German aircraft managed only a few hundred sorties across all of France. The Allies flew more than 14,000. Richter understood then that air superiority wasn't just an advantage, it was suffocating. German doctrine relied on armored counterattacks. Let the enemy land, then smash him before he could consolidate. But the Panzers never came. The nearest armored unit, the 21st Panzer Division, sat frozen by confusion and procedure, waiting for direct authorization from Hitler's headquarters. When it finally moved, it moved too late and without air cover, straight into a sky crawling with Allied fighter bombers. The division was torn apart before it ever reached the front. Standing in his bunker, guns firing, steel raining down, Richter felt the truth settle in. This wasn't a battle, it was an extermination. The Allies weren't trying to outthink him, they were trying to erase him. As the bombardment intensified, something in Richter's mind shifted. The tactical calculations stopped. What replaced them was colder, clearer, and far more terrifying. He stopped seeing ships and soldiers. He started seeing the system behind them, factories. Through his binoculars, he looked past the warships and imagined assembly lines thousands of miles away. Detroit, Birmingham, entire cities dedicated to production. Trucks, engines, aircraft, tanks pouring off lines day and night. Supplying an invasion of this size wasn't a miracle, it was math. He looked up at the sky again. Endless streams of C-47 transports, fighter bombers circling like predators. For every German aircraft in the air, there were dozens of Allied ones. Not because German pilots lacked courage, but because courage couldn't compete with output. Then there were the tanks, the Tigers, the Panthers. Technologically superior, feared by Allied crews. Richter knew that reputation well, but superiority came at a cost. They were complex, expensive, slow to replace. For every Tiger Germany built, the Allies rolled out dozens of Shermans. In 1944 alone, the United States would produce more than 29,000 tanks. Germany never came close. The Allies weren't planning to win by building better machines. They planned to win by building more of them, enough to bury resistance under sheer mass. This was the industrial equation of defeat. Every promise of ideology collapsed in the face of it. Willpower couldn't stop a bomber. Belief couldn't sink a battleship. Richter felt a deep, almost spiritual despair. He and his men were competent soldiers. They weren't about to die because they were inferior. They were about to die because they were outnumbered beyond reason. They were a finely crafted sword facing a steam-powered drop hammer. The propaganda back home suddenly felt obscene. The certainty of final victory wasn't just a lie. It was a mathematical impossibility. Someone, somewhere, had seen the production charts and sent them anyway. As the sun climbed higher, theory became reality. The naval bombardment reached a constant rolling thunder. The bunker shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Through the observation slit, Richter saw the first landing craft hit the shore. Higgins boats dropped their ramps. American soldiers spilled into the surf under machine gun fire. From above, he watched the beach turn chaotic and red. The men of the 352nd Infantry Division were exacting a terrible price. For a moment, it looked like the defense might hold. Then the equation reasserted itself. Allied destroyers broke formation and did the unthinkable. They steamed straight toward the beach, some so close they scraped sandbars. Their guns swung inland, firing directly into German strongpoints. One by one, bunkers went silent. New machines followed. Amphibious trucks drove straight out of the sea. Tanks crawled ashore. Some carried flails to detonate mines. Others bridged ditches or crushed obstacles. Hobart's funnies, purpose-built to dismantle defenses like his. The Germans had nothing to answer them. From his vantage point, Richter watched the fight on the beach shift. What had been chaos became procedure. What had been resistance became elimination. And he understood, with terrible clarity, that Normandy wasn't being contested. It was being processed. German strongpoints were picked apart with brutal efficiency. Naval shells collapsed bunkers. Tank rounds punched through concrete. Bombs erased positions that had taken months to build. On Omaha Beach alone, the 352nd Division would lose roughly 1,200 men in a single day. In a matter of hours, a huge portion of its combat strength was simply gone. Richter's own battery became a priority target. The shells started walking in. One slammed directly into a gun pit, erupting into a fireball that threw debris and bodies into the air. Another gun went silent. Then the phones went dead. The lines were cut. He was alone, his command fractured, his men scattered or killed. He looked up one last time. The sky wasn't empty. It was full. A moving ceiling of Allied aircraft, endless and calm, as if nothing on the ground could possibly challenge it. Out at sea, the first wave of landing craft was already being replaced by the second, then the third. Beyond them waited the Armada, patient and immense. A conveyor belt of men, tanks, fuel, and ammunition that seemed capable of running forever. By nightfall, the Allies would land around 1,500 tanks on D-Day alone. The battle on the beach was still raging. Men were still dying. But the outcome was no longer in question. What remained was time and tonnage. The fighting in Normandy would drag on for 2 more months. The hedgerows would turn every field into a killing ground. The cost would be horrific on both sides, but nothing that happened there would change the result. Every German tank destroyed was gone for good. Every Allied tank lost was replaced by 2 or 3 more. Every German soldier killed left a hole that could not be filled. For Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, and for thousands of German soldiers who survived that first day, the rest of the war became an epilogue. They fought on out of duty, fear, or habit. But the belief in victory died that morning. It vanished with the mist at dawn on June 6th. We often imagine the end of the Third Reich as a slow collapse, grinding forward until Berlin fell in ruins. But for the men on the Atlantic Wall, the end came in a single moment. It came when the horizon filled with ships, when the sky turned black with aircraft, when they realized they weren't facing an army, but the full, crushing weight of the modern industrial world. This was a new kind of war, not decided by courage or ideology, but by factories, logistics, and numbers beyond comprehension. And for one German officer staring through binoculars at a sea that had turned to steel, it was the morning he knew the war was already lost. Richter survived the bombardment by chance more than skill. When the bunker finally collapsed, it was not from a direct hit, but from repeated concussions that cracked the concrete like old bone. He was thrown to the floor, ears ringing, mouth full of dust. When he crawled out through a secondary exit hours later, the world he stepped into barely resembled the one he had left at dawn. The bluff was unrecognizable. Trees were splintered into jagged spikes. Craters overlapped craters until the ground looked boiled. The air smelled of cordite, burning fuel, and churned earth. Pieces of equipment lay scattered everywhere. Some German, some unmistakably American. A helmet here, a torn pack there. Evidence that the war had already moved past him. Below, Omaha Beach was still shrouded in smoke. The fighting had not ended, but it had shifted inland. Richter could hear it now. Not the thunder of naval guns, but the closer, sharper sounds of rifles, machine guns, and grenades echoing through the draws and hedgerows. The Allies were climbing off the beach. What Rommel had feared most was happening. Richter tried to re-establish contact. He found fragments of his battery, stunned men wandering without orders, some wounded, some simply hollow-eyed. No one knew who was in command anymore. Messages were contradictory or non-existent. Orders, when they came, were already obsolete by the time they were received. By afternoon, the truth became unavoidable. The Atlantic Wall had not failed because of cowardice or incompetence. It had failed because it was never meant to stop something like this. It was designed to resist an army. What arrived in Normandy was a system, a machine that fed itself with ships, planes, fuel, men, and steel at a pace no defense could absorb. As the day wore on, Richter withdrew inland with what remained of his men. They took up temporary positions, then abandoned them almost as quickly. Allied air power made daylight movements suicidal. Even single vehicles drew immediate attention. Fighter bombers prowled the roads like predators, striking anything that moved. That night, Richter sat in a shallow, slit trench with 2 surviving gunners. None of them spoke much. There was nothing left to say. The sounds of battle continued without pause, but the tone had changed. It was no longer frantic. It was methodical. Over the following days, the pattern repeated itself. German counterattacks formed and dissolved before they could fully assemble. Units arrived piecemeal, already depleted, already exhausted. Orders from high command were vague, contradictory, or rooted in fantasies about throwing the Allies back into the sea. Richter saw firsthand what the production numbers meant on the ground. He saw destroyed Sherman tanks being bulldozed aside so new ones could roll past them. He saw bridges blown by retreating Germans replaced within hours by prefabricated Allied structures. He saw artillery batteries that fired until their barrels glowed red, supplied by an endless stream of trucks that seemed to appear from nowhere. The German army still fought hard. In the hedgerows, infantry units inflicted heavy casualties. Tanks ambushed from concealed positions burned Allied armor at terrifyingly close range. For individual soldiers, the war was still a deadly contest of skill, nerve, and luck. But at the strategic level, it was already finished. By late June, Richter understood something that would take months or years to reach Berlin. Normandy was not a battle for territory, it was a demonstration. A proof that Germany no longer controlled the tempo of the war, the scale of it, or even its direction. From this point on, Germany would only react. Always too late, always with too little. In July, during the breakout from Normandy, Richter's unit was overrun near St. Lo. There was no dramatic last stand, no heroic charge, just confusion, smoke, and the sudden realization that American infantry were already behind them. Richter ordered his men to surrender. It was not bravery or cowardice, it was arithmetic. He spent the rest of the war in a POW camp in England, then later in the United States. The camps were not pleasant, but they were orderly. Food was adequate. The guards were firm but not cruel. What unsettled Richter most was not captivity, but time. Time to think. He read newspapers months old. He listened to guarded conversations. Slowly, the scope of Germany's defeat became clearer. Cities destroyed, entire armies lost, factories reduced to rubble. The same industrial logic he had glimpsed on the cliffs of Normandy now played out across the Reich. After the war, Richter returned to a country that barely existed. Germany was divided, shattered, exhausted. The certainty that had defined his early life was gone. So was the ideology that had promised meaning through victory. What remained was survival and reconstruction. He never spoke much about Normandy. When asked, he would say only that June 6th was the day the war became honest, the day illusions died, the day numbers mattered more than slogans. For the Allies, D-Day became a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and liberation. For the Germans who witnessed it from the wrong side of the guns, it was something else entirely. It was the moment they realized they were no longer participants in shaping history. They were subjects of it. The Atlantic Wall had been built to stop men. It was defeated by factories. That is the part of the story that often gets lost. Wars are remembered through heroes, speeches, and flags planted in the ground. But wars are won by logistics, production, and the ability to replace losses faster than the enemy can endure them. Normandy was not just the beginning of the end of the Third Reich. It was the clearest demonstration of how modern war truly works. For Richter, standing on that bluff at dawn, the war ended before it was officially lost. It ended when the horizon disappeared behind steel, when the sky filled with aircraft, when he understood that courage and skill, no matter how real, could not outweigh an opponent who could build an entire new army while you were still fighting the last one. That realization is uncomfortable. It strips the war of romance. It reduces it to inputs and outputs, factories and fuel, tonnage and time. But it is also the truth, and it is why stories like this matter. If you found this perspective compelling, take a moment to like the video. It helps us continue telling these deeper, often overlooked human stories from history. Subscribe to the channel for more narratives that go beyond dates and headlines, and explore what war looked like from the people trapped inside it. And if you have thoughts on this moment in history or connections to those who lived through it, leave a comment below. We read every one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.